Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you to the last panel, dealing with the simple issue, ideas for the future of capitalism. That is, we are supposed to talk about the future of capitalism. First, I would like to introduce to you the panelists, Professor Konrad, Director of the Max Planck Institute for Financial Right and Tax and Public Financial Issues. Well, sorry, I didn't learn that by heart. Dr. Frey is from Oxford Martin University. He is dealing with technology and work. I believe this is quite a an exciting, thrilling issue. And here the CEO of Klöckner & Co., one of the most important material dealers or retailers. He's been one of my partners. I'm always very proud if someone from our house comes here, a good person, and, is doing something like this. Welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, the question we were asked to discuss is a simple one. Mr. Curtis told us that people have enough, are fed up with capitalism. So capitalism simply forgot that Adam Smith has not been a retailer or an investment banker, but a moral philosopher. So he was dealing and thinking about the values, and we seem to lose these values increasingly. And then he came up with this interesting thesis. Capitalism is where the Catholic Church has been when Martin Luther came on stage. Now, it was a corrupt, group of people, dysfunctional in every aspect, and so they were ready for a reform. Now, my question I'd like to put to you three is very simple. What does a reform or reformation of capitalism should look like in order to give it a chance of survival? Now, what did capitalism do or achieve, and what can it achieve in the future? And what did it not or has not achieved? Inequalities, exaggerated pricing for basic goods. So, yes. So you are all supposed to be kind of reformers now.
Eine ganz einfache Frage, nicht wahr?
Simple question, actually. And my answer would be one sentence only. Now, when I came here, I started pondering the idea of capitalism, and I thought that the key element is individuality or individualism and the vested interest of the individual combined with private property and the freedom of concluding contracts, i.e. the possibility to mobilize this interest. These are, so to speak, the fundamental pillars of capitalism or the capitalist system. Now, if I look at where we go wrong right now in Germany, in Europe, I'd say that we are, so to speak, shifting the focus. Freedom or liberty is one concept. It's been important in the past, and the need for protection or security. Our society, and this applies to politics and the individual, offers protection and security and considers both more important than freedom today. And that's the problem, if you ask me. That's the point of departure. That's the reason why things are going wrong. This is why we are not willing to implement innovations offered by scientists and why we don't embrace new technologies. These are at least some of the aspects. Now, how to change it? Actually, I need to say, if you ask me how can we change it, I wouldn't know how to change this society, but I do see other societies, the Chinese one, for example, a society that embraces innovation. And I do see a lot of individuality in terms of how people dress, how people live, the life concept, so to speak, of the Chinese are very different from what you might imagine, everybody dressed in blue and riding a bicycle. So we are facing a process of dissolution which might take 10 or 20 or 50 years. The economic leadership might move to China from where it's been in the last 50 years, and I don't know how to stop the process.
Der Kapitalismus.
Well, capitalism will remain, but, it will shift to other areas and will change. But this does not answer the question whether or how we can reform capitalism, because people are not happy with it, are not satisfied. At least Alan Curtis said so. So I would like to ask you, maybe we should start with Dr. Frey. That is asking the question, where can you find, a starting point to give capitalism the things that people need? Talking about, business management, lies to operate. So I need the agreement of the society in order to run my business and earn money, etc., etc. So maybe, yes, please, in English, if you like.
By picking up on two references from the earlier presentations, were both related to Charles Dickens. And I think that some of you will remember that Charles Dickens also published a book called Hard Times, I think the same year as Friedrich Engels brought out the conditions of the working classes. Dickens was somebody who had suffered hardship, and he illustrates that rather in a colorful way in his writings. And the period that Dickens lived through was the first industrial revolution. It was a period where wages were stagnant. It was a period where the labor share of income was falling. It was a period of hollowing out of middle-income artisan jobs. In short, it was a period that looks quite similar to many of the economic trends that we are seeing today. The big difference, though, is that during Charles Dickens' times, people didn't show at the ballots. They voted with sticks and stones. And there were quite a few episodes of social unrest during this period of time. The British government, from time to time, even clashed with the Luddites, who rioted against the rise of the mechanized factory. This time around, people can actually show at the ballots. And people have the option, by democratic means, to opt against market incomes they don't like. Now, some people may not realize what the sources of some discontents are, but I think that those sources are becoming more and more apparent. People realize that globalization has played a role in this. But most people work today in non-tradable sectors of the economy, and the rise of China can only happen once. Most of the effects of globalization have already been felt. And I think few economists believe that by introducing tariffs, that jobs are going to move back to the West in any meaningful way. Which leaves us with one more source, which is technology. And I don't think that we're going to have a new wave of Luddite riots, but I do think that people will demand to see the benefits of technology also in their pockets. Not just as consumers, but also in their capacity as producers. And I would like to suggest to you that we've been introduced to false dichotomy during some of the earlier sessions. We were told that we need either growth or redistribution. The fact is that we can have both. And I think that one of the things that the Great Depression showed us is that in times of hardship, people feel more affiliated to the other. Right? The rise of the welfare state was in many ways a direct consequence of the Great Depression. And I do believe that redistribution is not necessarily the solution to everything, but I think that the welfare state was not a bad idea. And I think beyond helping people to relocate between jobs, to relocate between cities, because that is just as important. Productivity can only occur if people actually relocate into new, more productive jobs. And that requires also, to some extent, institutional change to allow them to do that. We need to look at things like occupational licenses. It's a good thing that we have them for doctors and lawyers, but they provide a hurdle to job switching in a lot of professions. We need to look at things as non-compete clauses. We need to look at things that help people relocate geographically as well. So I think the future of capitalism is a package, and I believe that what we need is a more colorful person than myself to sell that package and build a vision around it. And maybe the next panelist is the person for that.
Ja, herzlichen Dank. Jetzt leben wir in einem Staat.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, we live in a country with market economy, and I believe that this applies to all of continental Europe, not only for Germany. And this state, from 1948 onwards, when they introduced the social market economy and the Deutschmark, and I'm speaking for Germany now, but this applies to all of Europe. This state, from day to day, has turned into a state which allows market economy. Of course, I exaggerate. Now, the question whether we should leave the future to the state or what can we do in order to raise the acceptance of market economy, I prefer the word over capitalism. You know, capitalism has a negative connotation. So what can we do you know, running an enterprise, this of course is a very good contribution, but how do you see things?
Well, I'd like to pick up on Industry 4.0, and I'd like to begin and pick up on what Mr. Reitzhammer said, or what he used as his concluding point. He said that there are limits, but no limits or borders with regard to digitalization. And this leads to the fourth industrial revolution. Well, this is an era where business models have unlimited economies of scale, and that means that the stronger become even stronger, the winner takes it all. Also, marginal costs are zero. For example, the stronger these platforms are. This is also a prerequisite for this. In other words, you need scale data. We've talked about that as well. Innovation, but not so much the question of capital in this respect. So Wolfgang Fink just said that capital is looking for growth. Maybe that was a bit provocative, but what happens if growth doesn't need capital anymore? We might have capitalism without any capital. And here, this can have a major impact on the whole ability and investments, conventional investments. They may no longer result in the return that they had in the past. And this is, you will hardly need conventional investments, and you can have growth resulting from a lack of marginal cost. So we might have a totally different type of capitalism.
Wie würden Sie die Frage?
How would you answer the question? Well, fortunately enough, I'm not an entrepreneur in this world. This world has changed to such an extent that I really have a very high feeling of appreciation for those who dare to move through this territory. This is a difficult field. The responsibility has been moved from the individual level of the employee and raised to another, say, corporate or entrepreneurial level. And each and every one every individual, is affected. And at the same time, we've got this, say, jungle or thicket of regulations. I don't think it is the job of an entrepreneur to change the world and improve the appeal of capitalism. I believe the entrepreneur will move in another direction with the activities, with the innovations. He will move in areas where these activities will be appreciated and where the thicket of regulations is not as, say, thick as in Germany or Europe. So I believe we will have some kind of migration tendency, meaning a way out of Europe. So what can we do? Well, yes, maybe one thing. It was this talk between those two creating art. I believe it was interesting because it showed that there are many things which are subsumed under this term market economy and capitalism. Here we talked about the Iran war, we talked about other phenomena which might be, say, bad or problematic, but often enough we subsume them under, say universal terms like black sheep or scapegoat or something like this. And I believe the economic system within which we are acting and operating, has been given this epithet of scapegoat, universal scapegoat. So we can ask those, forming opinions, maybe we should try to influence them in such a way that things will be done in a different way.
Maybe it's not so much a question of the United States or Europe, or is it China? When we talk about these global platforms, the 5 largest companies worldwide are platform companies. The largest ones probably have enterprise value, which is maybe much more than the GDP of many countries. These companies and these platforms act globally. They're growing more and more, becoming stronger and stronger. So that means that it might not all be that important. Maybe the state doesn't play much of a role here at all anymore. The company could be headquartered in Ireland or who knows where. They're perfectly free to be anywhere they like.
Well, yes, the state or the government doesn't, or the Irish state, for instance, does not play a role as such. And I believe, in a platform economy, capital will play a role because investment will be made in intangibles, but also in human intelligence, in human work, or research, that is. And the second aspect is that the new world of economy will be, say, driven by investors, those giving capital. At least in the beginning, it will be driven by them. What about what will happen in case of an exit? What will happen to a company which is to be sold? What about a merger? What about a joint venture? Will the company still have, say, latitude or freedoms in such a merger? And will an individual still have freedoms? So talking about this term, individualism or freedom, I believe this is a term constituting or reflecting what we call market economy. So looking at us here in Europe, I see the world drifting apart. Recently, I went to China, and people told me, you really offer everything to us on a silver platter, data protection laws, etc., etc. Surely everything that will be possible in technological terms will be developed. We are going to use data as much as we can, and this applies to all sorts of other issues like, animal tests, more generously seen in Japan or in China, and more so than in Europe. Even America has got a different idea of data protection. So on the one hand, I see the global platforms, but I also see that these platforms, at the end of the day, for will be controlled from one or the other region. You see, at the end of the day, it is always about this inventive entrepreneur. So behind all these terms, you will find this entrepreneur. So the question is, how can such a system, which has created more wealth, and this is probably the most positive aspect I can say about market economy. But to what extent can the others, the other exaggerations, the flat prices in Munich or in London, for that matter, how can you say stop such things without the state regulating or even excessively regulating things?
Well, my reply to this is the excesses that you've just referred to are induced by the state for the most part. High rents, because the state regulation does not see to it that there's enough housing, and they have regulations, then building becomes more expensive, and that housing is hardly affordable. You have to pay a high rent, and the question is it really worth generating housing space? What does the state do? Rather than taking a look and tackling these difficult things, they talk about controlling rents. This is something they've taken out of the moth box, and it's a tool they're using. They're trying to say that they are not tackling the problems at their root cause. And this is something that really, it's not a problem of the capitalistic system per se. It's a question of this is something where our economic system is embedded in, and this is part of the economic system. What I mean here is the political framework where we have the economic system which needs to develop within this, and I think it seems to be getting out of control.
Auf gut Deutsch sagen
Well, in plain English, you might say a state or politics cannot violate economic laws because they will always be stronger. Let me put it this way. This is my opinion, and therefore a slightly challenging statement.
Okay, gut. Also nochmal eine Runde bitte.
Okay. State versus private initiative, both seen by the consumer and the manufacturer, as well as we talked about the role of the entrepreneur. For me, when it comes to the future of private economies, that is what is the crux of the matter.
With that at all, on the contrary. But I do think there are useful things that governments could do, and I don't want to leave you with the impression that I think the welfare state is a solution to everything. So one thing, for example, which I think was a huge success and in part publicly funded, was where I grew up, close to Malmö in Sweden, the bridge between Malmö and Copenhagen. Malmö was a harbor city in decline, and with the bridge, with the access to Copenhagen, it's become one of the most dynamic regions in Europe. And people can live in Malmö, where housing is cheap, work in Copenhagen, where wages are high, spend the money locally in Malmö, and that has given it a huge boost. And if we look to the United States, there's currently a feasibility study being done on building a hyperloop between Cleveland and Chicago. And with that, currently commuting time is 6 hours, two very different labor markets. With the hyperloop, in theory, it could become one labor market. People could live in Cleveland, where housing prices are low, work in Chicago, where jobs are more abundant. So I think that infrastructure also plays a role in this.
Also zusammengefasst heißt das.
So to sum up, state investment in important projects will make capitalism a surviving system.
Well, of course, you have to know exactly what the world will look like in 5 or 10 years' time. And that's where the company has to focus on, as well as the employees. They have to do the same thing. If they don't have a vision, if you just think short term, then, of course, a lot of companies will have problems. They need to have a vision, and the company then needs to be prepared. in other words, also prepared for platform economies. But that also means that my employees also have to be moved into digitalization so that my employees are empowered in the future to meet and react to the new requirements. This is something that an entrepreneur could do. The entrepreneur cannot change the market economy, but the entrepreneur can see to it that their company is made and viable for the future.
How do you see things, or do you agree with Mr. Berger, i.e., capitalism is not endangered in the long run? And then, of course, I refer to what Mr. Coupon said in his example, saying values will be, in effect, moral or rules are applied and are valid, and that the state does not slow down things too much.
What alternative do we have? There is no successful alternative. So far, there hasn't been one. But then, of course, we've got Luther, who at least had a second form of capitalism.
Well, yes, maybe there's capitalism without capital, you know.
With that, I think
Das Problem ist, letztendlich sind wir irgendwann alle tot, wie es heißt. Und gleichzeitig werden Entscheidungen kurzfristig getroffen. Wir müssen also alles im Blick behalten.
Well, yes, that's a good argument, surely.
So erfreulicherweise gibt
Well, luckily, there are some economic areas that compete with one another, and we also have the economic and political systems, and they are also competing. So as a result of this competition, I think this is reason for hope. Maybe not in this economic area, but for the world as a whole.
In sich.
I believe capitalism per se has got a lot of potential for, say, innovation, so that it will be around for several more years. You know, I'm sure maybe in specific regional, local versions, whatever. But, you know, maybe there are some kind of international preferences. Surely the companies will have a say, people will have a say. And this means I also refer to consumers and producers, as Mr. Frey said. And last but not least, without morals, there will be no government form or economic form will be able to survive in the long run. I believe morals is very important, or is a precondition for public acceptance.